Marco had built a simple but good life in Los Angeles. He worked at Tesla, took care of his wife Adriana and their 2 kids, and enjoyed the little things: weekend barbecues, fixing up his car, and watching the kids play in their small front yard. Their home wasn't fancy, just a 2-bedroom bungalow on the edge of the city, but it was theirs. It was where his daughter Sophia learned to ride her bike and where his son Daniel spent hours chasing fireflies. It was safe, it was stable, and it was everything to them. Then came the wildfire. At first it was just smoke on the horizon, something that seemed far away, like all the other fires they had seen on the news before. But by afternoon the sky had turned an eerie shade of orange, and the air smelled like burning wood. The wind picked up, carrying ash that drifted down like dirty snow. It didn't feel real at first, it was just another fire, right? One of many that happened every year. Then the evacuation orders came. The fire was moving fast, faster than anyone expected. Marco and Adriana had minutes to grab what they could: important documents, a few clothes, the kids' favorite stuffed animals. Sophia clutched her bear so tightly that her knuckles turned white. They packed into the car, their hands shaking as they turned onto the main road, which was already packed with families trying to escape. As Marco drove, he looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Flames were licking the edges of their street, and thick smoke swallowed everything behind them. That night, in a crowded evacuation center, they got the confirmation they had been dreading. Their home, every memory, every piece of their life, was gone. Marco barely had time to think. One moment, they were watching the news, hoping the fire wouldn't reach their neighborhood. The next, they were being told to leave immediately. There was no time for second-guessing, no time to grab everything they wanted, only what they needed. Adriana rushed to pack a small bag with important documents, a few clothes, and their wedding album. Marco grabbed his work boots and phone charger. The kids, still half dazed from the chaos, clung to their favorite toys. Sophia held her stuffed bear so tightly that Marco worried it might rip apart. Outside, the air was thick with smoke. Ash swirled in the wind, landing on their skin like warm dust. Neighbors were running to their cars, some carrying pets, others dragging suitcases across the driveway. Someone down the street was crying, but Marco didn't have time to see who it was. He threw their bags into the trunk, yanked the driver's door open, and told Adriana to get in. The kids sat in the back, whispering to each other, their voices shaky. As they pulled out of the driveway, Marco stole one last glance at their home. The fire wasn't at their doorstep yet, but it was close. The sky behind the house glowed bright. Orange and thick black smoke poured over the rooftops. By the time they reached the main road, flames were already creeping up the front porch. Marco gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The heat pressed against the windows, making it feel like the fire was chasing them. He wanted to go faster to outrun it, but traffic was crawling. Everyone was trying to escape at the same time. They drove for miles before reaching the evacuation center, a large gymnasium filled with cots, restless people, and the sound of quiet sobs. The smell of smoke clung to their clothes, their hair, their skin. The kids lay on a pair of blankets, too exhausted to cry anymore. Adriana curled up beside them, holding Sophia close, whispering that everything would be okay. Marco sat awake the whole night, his mind playing the same images over and over: the flames, the smoke, the fear in his kids' eyes. The next morning, the news confirmed what he already knew in his gut. Their home was gone. The place where they had celebrated birthdays, laughed over family dinners, and tucked the kids into bed every night had been reduced to a pile of ash and rubble. Marco stared at the screen, his chest tight, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. It wasn't just a house. It was everything. And now, it was nothing. Got it. Here's the full 600-word version while keeping it natural, emotional, and immersive. Marco tried to be the strong one. He told himself that as long as they were together, they could get through anything. But the weight of what they had lost was crushing. Every day he saw it in his kids. Sophia, once full of energy, now spent most of her time staring at nothing, her stuffed bear always clutched in her arms. She didn't ask to go home anymore. She knew there was no home to return to. Daniel barely left Adriana's side, holding onto her shirt like he was afraid she might disappear too. Adriana tried to stay positive, reassuring them that things would get better. Marco wanted to believe that, but he wasn't sure how. Living in temporary shelters was exhausting. The lack of privacy, the constant noise, the feeling of being in a place that wasn't theirs, it all added up. Some nights Marco barely slept. Other nights he lay awake watching his family, feeling useless. He was their provider, their protector. But how could he protect them from something that had already happened? The only thing that still felt normal was work. At Tesla, he knew what to do. He focused on the tasks in front of him, tightening bolts, inspecting parts, moving through the routine he had done for years. Here, at least, he had control. But he was different now, and people noticed. He spoke less. He looked tired. He moved slower, like he was carrying something too heavy to set down. His co-workers asked if he was okay, and he forced a small nod, a quick, "Yeah, just tired." It was easier that way. But the truth was, work wasn't the same either. Before the fire, Marco used to take pride in every car that rolled off the line. Now it was just something to pass the time. A way to keep his mind busy so he wouldn't have to think about what came next. But no matter how hard he tried to bury himself, in work the thoughts crept in. The insurance paperwork, the cost of rebuilding, the way Adriana's voice cracked when she thought he wasn't listening, the quiet sadness in Sophia's eyes. One afternoon in the break room, everything finally caught up to him. He was sitting alone, staring at his coffee, when Louise, a co-worker he had always been friendly with, sat down across from him. She didn't say anything at first, just waited. Then in a soft voice she asked, "How are you holding up?" Marco opened his mouth to lie, to say he was fine, that they were managing. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he swallowed hard and muttered, "I don't know how we're going to rebuild." His voice was so quiet he almost wasn't sure he had said it out loud. Louise didn't offer empty words or tell him things would be okay. She just nodded, letting him sit with the weight of it. And somehow, that made it easier. Over the next few days, Marco noticed small things, a few co-workers checking in more often, supervisors giving him space when he needed it. He didn't think much of it at first. People were just being polite. But then, something changed. The whispers in the break room, the way people looked at him with something more than sympathy. Then one afternoon, his supervisor pulled him aside. "Marco, we need to talk." Marco's stomach dropped. Was he in trouble? Losing his job? He couldn't afford that. Not now. But when he stepped into the office, he wasn't met with bad news. Instead, his supervisor handed him a tablet. "There's someone who wants to talk to you." Marco looked down at the screen. His breath caught in his throat. It was Elon Musk. Marco had no way of knowing it then, but that conversation would set off a chain of events that would change everything. Word about Marco's situation spread faster than he expected. At first, it was just a few co-workers checking in more often, asking how his family was holding up. Then his supervisor pulled him aside and told him that management was aware of what had happened. Marco didn't think much of it. People were just being nice, right? But the next week, things felt different. His supervisor seemed unusually cautious when speaking to him, almost like he was waiting for the right moment to say something important. One afternoon, just as Marco was about to take his break, his supervisor approached him again. "Hey Marco, can you step into the office for a second?" His stomach clenched. Something about the tone didn't sit right. Was this it? Was he about to be let go? Marco had been with Tesla for years, had given everything to his work, and now, after losing his home, he was going to lose his job too. He stepped into the office. He noticed a tablet set up on the desk. The screen was already on, and before he could process what was happening, a familiar face appeared. Elon Musk. For a moment, Marco just stood there, frozen. This wasn't a pre-recorded video. Musk was looking directly at him. "Hey, Marco," he said, his voice calm but sincere. I heard about what happened. Marco had no idea what to say. His mouth felt dry, his hand slightly shaky. Musk continued, "You've been with Tesla for years. You're part of our family. And family takes care of each other." Then came the part that Marco could hardly believe. Musk explained that Tesla would provide temporary housing at one of their facilities until Marco and his family could find something permanent. They would also cover their basic living expenses for the next few months to help them get back on their feet. Marco felt his chest tighten. He had prepared himself for more bad news, for another battle he would have to fight alone. Instead, here was one of the richest men in the world telling him that he wasn't alone, that someone cared. His voice cracked as he tried to find the right words. This is more than I could have ever hoped for." Musk nodded. "Take care of your family, Marco. We've got your back." As the call ended, Marco sat there, staring at the screen, struggling to process what had just happened. For the first time since the wildfire, he allowed himself to breathe. The Tesla factory had a different energy that day. Word had spread that Elon Musk himself was visiting, and employees were buzzing with excitement. People whispered as they worked, stealing glances toward the entrance, waiting for the moment he would walk in. Then suddenly, there he was, casual, confident, and focused. Musk moved through the factory floor, shaking hands, exchanging quick words with employees and taking in the environment like he always did. But today he wasn't just here to talk about Tesla. He was here for something more personal. When he finally approached Marco, everything around them seemed to fade into the background. Marco stood up straight, still trying to process the fact that the man he had only seen in interviews and company updates was now standing in front of him. Musk didn't waste time. He looked Marco in the eye and asked, "What's been the hardest part?" Marco took a deep breath. He had thought about this question a lot, but hearing it from Musk made it feel heavier. "It's not just losing the house," he said after a moment. "It's losing the feeling of stability, the feeling that my family is safe." Musk nodded slowly, as if turning Marco's words over in his mind. After a moment, he said something that Marco would never forget. "This isn't just about rebuilding homes, it's about rebuilding lives." Then, right there on the factory floor, Musk made an announcement that stunned everyone. Tesla would launch a wildfire relief project, an initiative designed to provide solar-powered shelters, energy storage solutions, and rapid disaster relief for families affected by wildfires. It wouldn't just be a donation, it would be a complete rethink of how to support communities after disasters. And then came the part Marco never expected. Musk looked at him and said, "I want you to help lead this." For a second, Marco thought he had misheard. Him, a factory worker, leading a Tesla initiative? It didn't make sense. He had no experience in running projects like this, no background in disaster relief. But Musk wasn't offering it as a suggestion. He was giving Marco a purpose. Marco swallowed hard, still trying to grasp what was happening. His whole life had been turned upside down, but now, standing in front of Musk, hearing these words, he realized something. What started as a tragedy was becoming his greatest mission. Marco had spent years working in the Tesla factory, following the same routine, assembling parts, checking quality, making sure every car met the highest standards. He was good at it, and it gave him a sense of purpose. But now, for the first time, he was stepping into something completely different. He wasn't just a factory worker anymore. He was sitting in meetings with engineers, designers, and disaster relief experts, discussing how to turn Tesla's technology into something that could change lives after wildfires. The shift was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt right. The first big project was Tesla's mobile relief stations. The idea was simple but powerful: convert semi-trucks into fully functional emergency hubs. Instead of relying on the slow process of rebuilding, these trucks would bring immediate aid to disaster areas. They were designed to run entirely on Tesla's solar panels and battery storage, providing electricity, Wi-Fi, clean water, and shelter to families who had lost everything. They would also serve as charging stations for first responders, food, distribution centers, and medical units. It wasn't just relief, it was self-sustaining high-tech disaster support. Marco threw himself into the work. He didn't just oversee the project from a distance, he was on the ground, traveling to areas hit hardest by wildfires. He met families struggling to rebuild, firefighters working nonstop, and volunteers doing everything they could with limited resources. The work was exhausting, but it fueled something inside him. Every conversation, every problem they solved, reminded him why he was here. One day, at a relief shelter in Northern California, Marco was helping set up a power station when a man approached him. He was holding a little girl in his arms, probably no older than 5. She had her head resting on his shoulder, her arms wrapped around his neck. The man looked tired, his clothes worn from weeks of uncertainty, but when he spoke, his voice held something unexpected: gratitude. "Because of this project, my little girl has a safe place to sleep again," he said. Marco felt something tighten in his chest. He had been that man once, the one searching for answers, trying to stay strong for his family while wondering what came next. The words hit him harder than he expected. He nodded, unsure of what to say at first. Then he finally responded, "That's why we're here." That night, as Marco sat by one of the charging stations, watching families gather near the mobile relief units, he realized something. It wasn't just about rebuilding homes, it was about rebuilding lives. It was about giving people something to hold on to, a way forward when everything felt lost. He looked around at everything Tesla had put into motion: the shelters, the power stations, the families who now had food, light, and a place to rest. He had started this journey feeling lost, but now he had never felt more certain of his purpose. But Marco's journey was far from over. Marco's story isn't just about loss. It's about resilience, kindness, and the power of people coming together in times of crisis. What started as a devastating wildfire turned into something no one could have expected: a chance to rebuild, not just for himself, but for others who had lost everything. Tesla's wildfire relief project didn't just provide shelters, power stations, and aid. It gave people hope when they needed it most. And at the heart of it all was Marco, a man who went from losing his home to leading a mission that would help thousands. If this story moved you, remember, acts of kindness, big or small, can change lives. Not everyone has the resources of Elon, Musk, but we all have the ability to help. If you believe more stories like this should be told, hit the like button. Share this video to inspire others. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more powerful, real-life stories. Because sometimes, the worst moments in life lead us to our greatest purpose.